Welcome to the Great Man Within podcast. Every episode designed to help you discover and live the great man within you. Today, we are talking about simplifying your life. Tony Robbins once said that complexity is the enemy to execution. And one of my mentors once said that clarity breeds energy, simplicity breeds energy. And when we complicate things, that's when we get stuck. That's when we procrastinate. That's when life can feel heavy. So today's topic is all about how to simplify your life. And what's that I hear? We might have a special guest joining us today. Who we got here?
Oh, it's good to be back, Dom. It is good to be back.
What's up, brother?
Yeah, I feel like you've been rolling solo on these dailies, and I've been more of a consumer and a fan than I have been a participant. But I appreciate you pumping these things out. I know in this time of coronavirus and COVID-19, and do I stay in New York? Do I leave New York? It's been helpful to hear your voice and insights, man. So, but it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back, man. And I'm sure people are tired of hearing my voice. They're happy to hear yours again. You were the inspiration behind this particular conversation because, when we did our design the next year of your life, right? Like we picked our word for the year 2020. You had planted a stake in the ground around movement. And yet for the first time in your history of picking one word for the year, you actually decided to make a change midway through not even midway, early in the year, to simplicity. Why?
Yeah, I've been doing themes, I think, since 2007. I've had a yearly theme. I've never changed it. Sometimes it's made a big difference in my life. That's been the last few years. Before that, it was just more of a funny theme to have.
What were some of the funnier themes that you had by any ridiculous
I had one that was back to the core, just because I wanted better abs.
How did that work out for you?
Not great. Core's still not there. It was big in 07 was my first one.
I remember.
Just big in 07.
Were you big in 07? Like, did that happen?
I was pretty big. I was a meathead in 07 for sure.
Okay.
Boat Party Brian was in full effect 2007.
Boat Party Brian? Is that a thing?
That was not a theme. It was a thing. Yes.
What does Boat Party Brian look like?
It was just get in the gym, look good for the boat, and get out there and party. That was it. But yeah, man. So the last month or two, I've been reflecting on this idea of movement as my theme, and I've noticed myself doing the opposite, like not moving. And I've noticed this as something that's popped up in other parts of my life too. But when I started thinking about, well, why don't I have a movement practice? Why haven't I put this into place? And I feel like I've been overcomplicating it. And when I think about the conditions that I put on, like, well, what is my movement? Like my movement practice, what is this going to look like? It's going to be the perfect movement practice. And as a matter of fact, like it's going to be so good. I'm going to feel awesome doing it. That it's going to be like a transferable skill that I can do at home, at weddings, at the club. I can dance. And also I don't want to pay for it because like this is silly. I shouldn't have to pay for something like this. So I put like all these conditions on like the perfect type of movement practice, and I just didn't do it.
Yeah.
And I saw that translate into other parts of my life. I'm starting to see these patterns. And I think some of the biggest learnings in my life have happened when I've reflected back on my behaviors and outcomes and seen patterns. And this is a pattern of mine for sure.
And the pattern is you overcomplicate things.
The pattern is I overcomplicate things. I make them more complex than they need to be, and they just never happen. Or I procrastinate into rushing into something. And so
you procrastinate into rushing into something. What does that mean?
Yeah, I procrastinate doing something. Like let's say a work product that I need to get out for work. I procrastinate doing it, and then I have to rush at the last minute to get it done.
I see. Yep.
And that's another piece of, and this idea of wanting to make it perfect. Like I don't even start on it, or I don't even push it out because I want it to be perfect and the best thing ever. And there's probably some fear. If there's a psychologist on the podcast right now, there's probably some fears that are in there around fear of being not doing something right. Of it being looked at as silly, as being laughed at, as whatever it may be. But it has really held me back on moving forward on things. And so for the first time this year I decided to change my theme from movement. While yes, that's still something I want to do, to my new theme of this year is simple. I just want to, whenever I'm focused on something and I can start to feel that overwhelm of like, I need to do all these things, I just want to keep it simple.
Right. Right. You know, a few things popped up for me as you were sharing. Adam Grant, who's an author and a teacher at University of Pennsylvania, he had a tweet recently that I think I shared in one of the 3 for Thursday emails, which said, you don't procrastinate to avoid work. You procrastinate to avoid negative emotions. And then Michael Young, who's one of our anchors in the mastermind, sent that to me. And I think that is really profound. We don't procrastinate because we have an aversion to work. We procrastinate because we want to avoid negative emotions. So if we're going to simplify like what you're feeling right now, Brian, right? Originally, when you picked movement as your theme, let's just get really simple and clear on what was the intention behind that in the first place?
The simple theme,
like let's get simple and clear on what was like your intention behind even picking movement as a theme for your year to begin with, because I would imagine you lost sight of that.
Yeah. Well, I think I love, first of all, Adam Grant is a hero of mine. Love that guy. He does some amazing work in the IO psychology field. And I think that that's true when it comes to work products for me around the idea of procrastination.
Yeah.
But for me, procrastination and just not doing something are two different things. At least when I procrastinate, something gets done. But it's usually because I'm pressed up against a deadline of some sort. And the negative feeling that Adam Grant's probably talking about, in my case, is this feeling of rejection. Like if I do this thing, I want to avoid the feeling of rejection. So that's, I think, one side. But when we're talking about my theme of movement and just not doing it, wasn't procrastination. It was just not doing it, period. I didn't dance on my own a single time.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
Well,
right?
I would say that example that you just gave about procrastination and then delivering on something, let's say there's a work deadline, is you're responding to some external force. You're responding to someone else saying, this is the deadline and there are consequences, there are repercussions. So, you actually go through the same process as you do when you actually pick something for yourself, where the only person who's on the hook is you. The difference is you are allowing yourself in those self-imposed environments to just say, you know what, I don't need to get it done. So you procrastinate the same way. You just forget to speed up at the end and get it done, right?
That's exactly it. Yes.
And dude, like you're
shaking
not alone.
my head vigorously up and down.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can't see, Brian's head's about to fall off his neck. This happens all the time for us, and this is why we don't do the things that we want to do, is because we're so conditioned to responding to external deadlines and consequences, maybe at work or maybe like with your partner at home. But when it comes to the thing that you want to do, it's the same process plays out, but then you just kind of let it go because you're the only one keeping yourself in check, right? So I think that's also really important to simplify, what's happening here first and foremost.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And when it comes to the theme of movement that I wanted to do this year, to answer your question about what was that behind it, the problem is I wanted it to be all things. I wanted to develop these awesome skills. I wanted it to be the perfect song. I wanted it to be the perfect movement type. And I wasn't sure if I just picked somebody on YouTube, is that a really good teacher or is this a really good teacher? And so I wanted it to like meet all of these criteria and do all of these things. That's complicated. It didn't happen because I didn't even want to spend the energy to go find all those things. It's ridiculous. And so we were talking about before, is just, what if I just got up, hit play on whatever is on Spotify and just move my body, and that being good enough?
Yes.
And so from like going to simple, like just what is that one step? What is the one thing that needs to happen for me to do what I wanted to do?
That's right. And this all goes back to the beginning planning process of whenever we say we want to do something, to get abundantly clear on why that matters. Like what's the payoff that you're expecting to experience by having a year of movement? Like what joy is that going to bring into your life? To get really clear on like, how can I make this energizing and simple at the front end so that like it actually happens, right? And I've fallen into the same traps as you before, man. And I still do in many cases, of just like wanting to overcomplicate, or my perfectionism gene popping up. And, one of the things we were talking about before we recorded is, in my life, like I have a vast variety of interests, right? Like that span a lot of different things. And I need that in order for me to satisfy my hunger for life. But I end up spinning a lot of plates in my life as well. And I overcomplicate my life. And then it can feel heavy and plates start to drop. And then we look at people like Mr. Rogers, right? You told this story.
Oh, yeah.
Tell this story, man, because like he's a perfect example of how you
it's so good, man. Like, so I just watched, I think it's A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is the movie title, and it came out recently with Tom Hanks. And I resisted watching the movie because I was never a big Mr. Rogers fan, and a little bit maybe thought he was creepy, but I watched this movie on a recommendation, and I loved it. I loved the movie because amongst all the beauty that was in it, it came down to one simple thing. Like Mr. Rogers had an internal simple theme, let's say, for his life, which was to help kids feel feelings. That was his whole thing. His entire show was about that and how he showed up in life. It wasn't like he was a character on the TV show. That's how he was. And the movie goes into some of that in sort of detail. But I said, wow, like, here's a guy that had a show dedicated to helping kids feeling feelings from 1968 until I think 2001 or 2003 or something. This guy who did it for 30 plus years on this one simple thing. And I just thought that was so freaking beautiful. Because like you, Dominic, I have a lot of interests, but I also crave that simplicity. The like one thing that like, this is me.
That's right, man. And we can always mushroom out from there. But like to actually make it quite simple, the best brands in the world are simple. Like, you know, Nike, just do it, and Think Different with Apple. For us, like what we're talking about is everything that we speak of on this podcast is so you can discover and live the great man within you. And that's one of the reasons why I say that at the beginning of every one of these podcasts is so that I can simplify, when you come here, that everything we do is tying back to discovering and living the great man inside of you. We had, Brad Barrett, who runs the Choose FI podcast, which gets over like 1 million downloads a month. Their message is simple, which is spend less, save more, invest the difference. And then in a period of 5 to 10 years, you can choose to stop working if you want. And their thing has caught fire over the last 3 years. And they have 300 groups in 300 different cities across the globe because of that simple message and a simple program to take back your financial independence. The most powerful messages, the most powerful lives at its core are quite simple. You know, and it's not to say that you can't add layers of complexity on top of that. And there's a book that I read called The 12-Week Year by Brian Moran, which is all about making execution simple. And they talk about how, you can do more in 12 weeks than most people can get done in a year. And it's primarily geared towards like sales organizations, et cetera. But they give this example about a practice called periodization that Olympic gymnasts use, where they learn one technique at a time. Maybe like for a floor routine, they learn one technique. They practice it relentlessly for 2 to 3 weeks. And when they master that, when it hits like DNA cellular level, then they layer on the next thing. And then the next thing, versus like teaching 12 different techniques in one day and your body just gets scrambled. Like, so how do we start to simplify our lives, our habits, our practices so that like we can actually do the things that we want to do?
Yeah. And Dominic, in times like this, where things are changing so fast and it's sometimes hard to make decisions based on like, Beck and I we were in New York. We decided for our purposes that we were going to get out of New York for a while. And we were just trying to decide on where that would be. And of course I overcomplicated it. I was like, well, what's next to a hospital and what would be safe and the food and this and that. And like, what happens in 6 months? It's like, I can't figure out like really what's going to happen in a day.
Right.
So like, let's just simplify this thing and go somewhere that feels comfortable. It feels safe for now.
That's right.
And if we have to make another decision down the road, then we do that. Right.
Versus
but like,
paralysis.
let's just do the simple thing. Yeah. It's just paralysis, and paralysis is exhausting. That's why I like that quote that you mentioned of, what is it? That clarity breeds energy.
Yeah. Clarity breeds energy.
Yeah. It breeds movement too. So
yeah, man. And one of the things that I'm cognizant of as we do these daily podcasts is every day I'm giving something different. And on one hand, I know that that each person is going to gravitate towards something, and other episodes are just not going to necessarily hit the mark for you, right? Like, so we do some conversations about gratitude or morning routines or evening routines. And I'm cognizant that I may be overwhelming some of our listeners because they're like, I have to do all of these things. I have to do a breathing practice. I have to do a morning routine. I have to do an evening routine. And what I want to give you permission as you're listening to this is I've built this up, and Brian has built these things up over years of periodization. I master one thing at a time. I focus on, I'm going to nail my morning routine for the next 3 weeks. Of course, I'm not going to let other things like all the other balls drop, but like this is the one priority I'm making for the next 3 weeks. I'm going to master that. And once that becomes habit, then actually I don't need a lot more discipline or willpower. It's just kind of like on autopilot. So we want to give you the permission to simplify what you have been listening to over this past week or 2 weeks or however long, and just pick one thing that if you did that, it would be like the fastest, biggest impact in your life.
I love that. Keep it simple. And Dominic, to leave us on this note, I even tried to overcomplicate the theme of simple by calling it so simple or keep it simple or super simple. And you know what? It's just simple.
16 steps to simplifying your life.
Of course.
Yeah. That's great, man. And I'll tell you what, I'll leave some recommendations on books that have really helped for me to simplify my life. The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, Essentialism by Greg McKeown, and The One Thing by Gary Keller. And you can, all three of those books are on our list that you can download at doinnerwork.com. If you go to doinnerwork.com on the resources tab, download the book, or I think it's the book list that says 18 books every business leader must read, and the 12 books every man must read. You can find those books on there as well. Bri, great to have you back, brother. This was an awesome conversation.